There we
Hello,
are.
everybody, and welcome to another Rowing Chat. I'm Rebecca Caro, and today I'm joined by Steve Gladstone. Steve, welcome.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Now, please tell the listeners a little bit about yourself and your history in rowing.
Well, I'm presently the heavyweight rowing coach at Yale. Began my career years ago as a freshman heavyweight coach at Princeton, then lightweight coach at Harvard for 4 years, and a total of 20 years at the University of California, Berkeley, and 12 years at Brown. That's probably all the detail you'll need on that.
Did you row as an athlete yourself?
I rowed. I started in prep school at Kent School, and then rowed at Syracuse.
Fantastic. So you're the man who probably knows the East Coast Ivy League better than anybody else.
Coached at let's see, Yale, Harvard, Princeton, and Brown. So that's four of the H and A.
It's nearly a royal flush, isn't it?
Right.
Now, you obviously know an enormous amount about rowing and coaching, and the people who are listening to us today are mostly athletes and coaches who are keen to learn a little bit more, some little tidbits that they can try for themselves. So let's start off with a quick question about coaching as a team. You obviously have colleagues who coach around and with you on the program, but you're the leader. When you're coaching as a team, how do you upskill your colleagues?
Well, I think the first thing that has to be established, or if you want to call it the basic ground rules, are that we're all in this together. We're all part of the same endeavor, and that we're all bringing our own strengths to the group. It's very much a collaboration. It's not a boss and two employees. I view it as a collaboration, and in that way, if all goes well, people, as I indicated before, bring their talents and strengths to the fore.
So do you have like a weekly meeting? How do you encourage them to raise issues or spot opportunities where a shared learning would help the crew?
Well, we're fortunate. Our physical environment, our office is tiny. We have 3 desks here, and both they're formal times of discussion, which of course are useful in terms of planning. However, I think probably from the point of a nuanced sense of it is there's a spontaneity that takes place in the course of life itself in this environment.
So you can't help but bump into each other and overhear. Do you all run the exact same training program for all your different crews?
They're going to be, they're first of all, we share the coaching responsibilities, and during the course of the academic year, each coach will be working with individual athletes, and it's, to use an overused phrase, it's not one size fits all. There are people in the program that are at a very high level in terms of their technical ability and their maturity in terms of racing, and there are people that are relatively new to the game. So physiologically, it certainly wouldn't make sense to have one size fits all, and that brings into the equation various boat sizes. So you can be working with 4s, pairs, 8s, and both at some particular points in time, isolating people by rough capability, and then on the other hand, from time to time, taking people of desperate capabilities and merging them into one boat, so that there can be advancement that way. Yeah, I think that explains it as carefully as at this point.
As a university program, obviously you get a new influx of athletes every year, and that in itself presents a challenge for continuity. When new athletes join your program, what is the main focus of your coaching in those initial weeks?
The first component is to establish, and this is verbally established through meetings, individual meetings and collective meetings, to have people have a very clear idea of what the objectives are, having them understand that coming into the program, there are going to be variations on the theme that they'd experienced as juniors, and that we obviously fully respect what they've done. There'll be a lot of similarities, but there will also be differences, and that we're all looking to express a common theme, both in terms of our way of being with each other, to the basics, the fundamentals of the stroke. So that there's, if you will, we set the table through conversation, and then we begin with the mechanics. And we're very fortunate at Yale to have great indoor facilities. We're in this gym, Payne Whitney Gym, which was built in the 1930s, and Payne Whitney was an oarsman from the 1870s. And we've got these 3 rowing tanks and 3 large rooms that we use, and so we'll get into the tank and we'll observe the athletes, and then we will present, if you will, the new material. And of course, starting with the finish of the stroke and breaking it down, and then the body preparation and so forth. So there'll be sessions inside where it's quieter and easier to communicate. And then eventually get on the water and begin to integrate these new people into the squad in various boats.
Now, young, energetic, particularly male athletes can be a handful. Do you encourage ongoing dialogue between the athletes and the coach, or is that something that just comes with maturity in the 2nd, 3rd year of your program?
Well, we have close contact with our students. We have a residential college system at Yale, and we have deans in these colleges, and there's a strong relationship between our student athletes and their college and the deans of their college. And of course, we see the student athletes on a daily basis. And so, again, in the course of life itself, without necessarily formal meetings, we communicate with one another, and we get a sense of how the student is developing. Particularly their first semester, their freshman year, is a very important transition period.
Now, you obviously have a particular challenge in the program that you run, because you have a boat race and you also have a 2K season. How do you balance training for those 2 very different events?
We're fortunate where we row on the Housatonic River, essentially between 2 dams. And the stretch of river is close to 5 miles. And it affords us the opportunity on many occasions to simply row from dam to dam, and particularly with today's technology, with the GPSs, the speed coaches, and so forth, we can really do meaningful work. And I find long before I came to Yale, I've always been drawn to distance training, low rate, high intensity work over distance. With the years that I was at Cal, we had a 6-mile stretch. Here it's a 5-mile stretch. So during the course of the fall and early spring, we're going to do a lot of continuous rowing at pressure over that distance. And I think it's every bit as much a mental, how would you call it, challenge as it is physiological, as all things are. I mean, that's hardly profound. But repeating that distance with frequency is great preparation, not only for the boat race, but it's great preparation for the shorter distances. There's an emotional resiliency that's built from long distance rowing, and fundamentals are always going to be more, how would you call, more easily acquired at lower ratings. There's a higher consciousness of slide control. There's a higher consciousness of timing at the lower rates than at the higher rates. So, I in fact view the preparation, if you will, for the Yale Harvard race to be very much to our advantage over the short distances, over the 2K. Yeah.
So what sort of ratings are these crews training at for your long, hard rows?
Long, hard rows, typically we'll break them into 4 segments, 4 5-minute segments. Some of them will be 5 at 18, 5 at 20, 5 at 22, 5 at 24. Some will be, by the same breakdowns, they'll begin at a higher rate at 20 or 22. But rarely is their work done above 26 strokes a minute. And the strokes are always encouraged to have them fully driven out. There's nothing cautious about it. They're fully driven out strokes. And so the muscular endurance is going to be challenged. And yeah.
Do you line the boats up side by side so you have 2, as close as you can, matched speed boats?
Yeah, I run matched boats. I would say 95% of our training, 95% of our side-by-side training is going to be with matched boats. I see no real benefit in separating and becoming boat 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The competitive component, I think, is essential to development, physiological development and mental development. So we'll do some of it side by side, but as I mentioned earlier, with new technology, you'll get the precise speeds of the boats, and on some level, it'll teach people to stay focused with the task at hand in their boat, on their work to generate the speed, as opposed to responding to another boat. There's value in both, and we do both. But it's that the new technology has been a real bonus, I think.
Tell me a little bit about the sort of measures that you're using from the new technology. Are you just tracking speed in meters per second, or are you looking at distance moved per stroke and other measures?
Basically it's the former. Just the speed at what rate. I know that there are a lot of folks that are using a variety of telemetries, and so forth. And there's probably some value in that. But I feel like, again, from my eye, I've got a pretty good sense of what I'm looking for and what's effective, and the variations on that theme. That might sound a little arrogant, but that's my take on it.
We often say Mark 1 eyeball is a very good bit of technology.
Indeed.
In the program more generally, do you set training zones for individual athletes, either by heart rate or wattage, or individual targets, for example, when they're on the ergs?
Absolutely. When indoor work, is very easy to monitor, and we use all the means to do that. On the water, it's not difficult to stay in proper zones because you can really use rating for that. Rating, and if you want a higher zone at the same rate, just put another boat next to them, and the heart rate will go up. But in our indoor training, we have I'm a big fan of watt bikes. We have a number of watt bikes as well as ergometers, and we can, depending upon the individual athlete, we can make recommendations and variations on the theme. In university coaching, just as an aside, and this might be of interest to some of the people that are listening, you're dealing with an academic cycle as well, which is midterms, finals, papers, this kind of thing, and one really needs to be sensitive to the various academic loads that these people are under in order to keep them healthy and to maximize their progress. So you can't be, unlike on a national team, you can't be doctrinaire and said, Monday we're doing this, and Monday, the November 16th, we're doing that, and we're, so forth down the line. It's much more nuanced than that. And quite frankly, I like that challenge. And not that you asked, but I like that challenge, and I think it puts an interesting component to preparation for racing.
So let's dive a little deeper into that. You've already hinted that emotional intelligence is a recognized quality that you value in your athletes. Do you attempt to actually train the mind as well as the body of your athletes?
It would be difficult for me to draw the dichotomy between the two. It's a whole. Nothing can take place without the mental component. What we think is going to drive what we do, so that the training itself is always directed toward the mental as well as the physiological piece. They're inseparable, but there are events that you can create that will prompt expansion, and I think that the various training loads, the components, and the nature of the training can work to develop the emotional resilience of the athletes.
Let's talk a little bit about those events. Give an example.
Well, I think the most obvious ones, the most memorable workouts that people have when we reflect on our time, whether it be in secondary school or university, are the ones that are unusual. And that perhaps they don't make necessarily physiological sense. And understand, these prompts that I'm mentioning, or these events, are few and far between. They're not weekly. They're not monthly. They might be 2 or 3 events in the course of a full academic cycle. But for example, we had this wonderful coach that I worked with when I was at Cal, a number of them. But when I arrived, this fellow, Craig Armacani, was the freshman coach, and I'd coached him back in the day. He's now the head coach at Stanford. And Craig was wonderful at creating these events. For example, when the freshman class arrived, we would rent vans, drive 2.5, 3 hours up to Yosemite National Park, and the freshmen, with the coaches behind, would essentially race up the back of Half Dome. Well, this Half Dome is a big monolith.
It's huge.
Yeah, it's huge. No, not the face, but the back. And did that make any physiological sense? No, not really. I mean, it's arduous, but it sure did. It sure was bonding. And it was something they talked about the rest of their lives. So it's that type of thing that can be done to create an energy and a strength and a growth, and it's driven just for that reason alone. Or at Yale, one workout a few years ago, we ran from Payne Whitney's gym on campus to about 2 or 3 miles out to the Yale Bowl and did a tour de stade, which means ran every section of the stadium. But it was about a 2-hour event. And so they're memorable, and they break a routine, and I think one makes a mistake if they become too doctrinaire, too stuck to, quote, the program. Of course, you don't want to have people injured either, but yeah.
Yeah, we once got advised to chop logs during our Christmas holidays. Somebody cut their finger off, so that got cut from the program the next year. Now, you've mentioned, of course, that you get athletes who are already trained. They have learned to row, they've been juniors, but maintaining concentration over a long UC2 row. Paul Lucas from Gloucester Rowing Club in the UK is asking, how do you do this? And I'd like you to focus your answer particularly on how you work with the coxswains to help achieve that focus.
Just to circle back for a moment, 80% of the people that we get, have rowed and at various levels. Occasionally, we'll have novices. Long distance rows, and I think again, I'll come back to this thought that if we want to have full focus and we want to bring good energy to a practice, there have to be specific criteria that are measurable. And this GPS stroke coach, whatever the name of this product is, literally is giving you constant meters per second. And you can say, this is what we want to average. This is what we want to hold. This is the goal of the crew, to do this over, let's say hypothetically, say 15 minutes or 20 minutes. That's one way of keeping focus and keeping energy to the workout. The other, of course, which requires significant discipline, but discipline that must be acquired at some point in the process, is put one boat next to another, and have the focus remain in the boat, and yet the stimulant of having a competitive partner there is also present. But what I would say is this: the concentration periods, and this is anecdotal. I think that in general, if we're looking for high levels of concentration, I'd say anywhere from 8 to 10 minutes is a reasonable and achievable goal. And at the end of 8 to 10 minutes, you don't have to stop rowing, but you could introduce drilling, which forces a particular awareness. The drill is going to force a particular motion that's prompted by an awareness. But much beyond that is indeed challenging. And I think the coach would also want to be aware of endless long distance, moderate intensity rows, because frankly, it can be very boring. And beyond that, perhaps this is one man's perspective, and an American-bred coach, which I am, is that people are drawn to the sport because they love to compete. This is not water ballet. And Steve Fairbairn wrote about this, 150 years ago, or probably now 150 years ago. Athlete's job is not to pose in the boat. It's to work the oar to move the boat. And that requires deep concentration. And as Fairbairn said, put one boat next to another and have the bow stay in front. So this, again, it speaks to this issue of physiology and psychology, if you want to call it. They're intertwined. And all training should be directed toward the development of emotional and competitive acuity.
Fantastic. And for any listeners who are interested in Steve Fairbairn, Row Perfect has got his full oeuvre in ebook form on our website, which you can buy. It's also in the Kindle store. And it is absolutely true today, and it never ceases to amaze me how many current day coaches quote Steve Fairbairn to me. His principles are still absolutely applicable. Now, we've touched a little bit on new people joining your program, and of course, there is a very large influx of international athletes who are not native North Americans rowing in your program. Is this influx a good or a bad thing for Yale? And this is a question from Duncan Conybeare in the UK.
I think that the influx of internationals in U.S. rowing began at the universities, began in the late 1980s. And that was a specific time, I think, where it was a convergence of a number of the American universities on the academic side of things, beginning to embrace and admit foreign students, students from outside the country. To answer the question, is it a good thing? Yeah, there's no question that it's a good thing. Young men and oarsmen, or oarswoman, as the case may be. When I say oarsman, we can interchange. It's oarswoman as well. The American universities, really are looking for the best and the brightest. I know that's an overused phrase. Best and the brightest, and whether they come from Concord, New Hampshire, or they come from Berlin, Germany, or they're coming from Auckland, New Zealand, it's really not an issue at all. In fact, it's not only not an issue, but in many ways, having observed this since the late 1980s, having observed this, it brings such a wonderful vitality and perspective to our sport. And ultimately what you see is that, which is in some ways is predictable, but at the same time heartening, is we're all brothers, whether you're pulling an oar in Berlin or pulling an oar in Auckland or pulling an oar in Long Beach, California. There's the same mentality exists, no matter what the place of origin is. So it's enriched the American collegiate scene enormously, I think. And of course, if you want to circle way back in American rowing history, collegiate rowing history, in the beginning it was the exclusive bastion of the well-fed, well-bred boys from the right schools. And then it expanded from that into, broader based as the American public high schools embraced rowing. And then, if you want to call it the final phase of expansion, into the international scene. So it's a wonderful mix. And what it does ultimately, it increases the standard and the quality of the racing. Which
is, of course, a good thing all round. Do you think, obviously, Yale has a a long track record in sending athletes up to international representation for the US. Do you think these overseas athletes studying in the USA has an impact on their own national teams?
I think the answer to that would be yes, and predictably, some of the national teams have opposed to having their athletes study abroad, and one can see from the point of view of using the word control, you could see why that would be their desire. I would say you would probably, let's say in the UK, I'm sure the national team would probably, the British national team, senior team, would rather have their athletes, were they in Dorney, than in Wallingford or in Ely. So it wouldn't necessarily mean, but they would rather have them on a daily basis than having them at university. But ultimately, when it's engaged in and embraced, it works. It can work brilliantly. There'd be nobody better to reference than Mike Spracklin and the Canadian team, where so many of those people that were winning gold medals in the 8s and straight 4s were coming out of U.S. programs, the University of Washington, the University of California, whether it be Scott Franson, Jake Wetzel, we could go on and on and on. And clearly, those people, those individual athletes' engagement at their own universities did nothing but speed up and produce great results for the Canadians. The Australians ran an interesting experience recently with their under-23 squad, where they literally ran a training camp in Princeton, New Jersey, after the American collegiate season. The first time they did it with a straight 4, and that straight 4 won a silver medal at the under-23 Worlds. And then I think they did it the next year with an 8, and that 8 won a silver medal in the under-23 Worlds. So I think with time, the national federations, senior national federations, will learn that if the oarsman goes to the United States and gets an undergraduate degree, and if they're embraced upon their return, they'll come back in very good shape. An immediate example of that, here you mentioned Yale, was Hubert Trubinsky, who had won the under-23 Worlds in the single prior to coming to Yale. Came to Yale his first year, and most of what his time on the water was sweeping. He sculled occasionally, and he went back to his club in Berlin and won the under-23 Worlds again and said he was faster. And that's anecdotal, but I think it does help make a point.
It does indeed. Now let's move on to the big knotty question of how do you select rowers? And that's a question from Damien Derleek at Port Adelaide Rowing Club in Australia.
Let me begin by explaining the time period that we have with our athletes. Our collegiate season, training season, begins the 1st of September and finishes at Yale after the boat race, roughly around the 7th of June. And we have a Christmas break where they're off most of the time, although we do go to Florida briefly. So literally 5 days a week, 5 to 6 days a week, we're working with these athletes, working to develop them technically, physiologically, emotionally, the whole ball of wax. So in a very real way, the selection process begins on that date. It's not necessarily, there's observation of development in all those categories. We run various boat classifications during that time period: pairs, straight 4s, 4 widths, and 8s. We're constantly changing lineups different combinations of people. And over time, and we record all this data. Literally, I have logs that go back to 1969, which so we're recording all this information. So in a very real sense, the selection process is ongoing. That being said, probably the month prior to the racing season, which begins at the end of March, there's going to be carefully orchestrated racing between boats in pairs, 4s, and 8s. And there'll be switch across on the water. There'll be time pieces. They'll be looking at as I said, the Cox box and so forth. The selection, it's not one day, it's not one event. It's a combination of observation over a prolonged period. And then you put your boat together. Very often you go through that what we would consider a thorough evaluation, and you put a first 8 together and a second 8 together, and the second 8's faster. But it's not necessarily, that doesn't happen that often, but it's not an exact science. And then in this country with our cup racing, where we're racing almost every weekend through April, you can also try different combinations. But hopefully you're on schedule, and 2 weeks before the regional championships, which is the Eastern Sprints, you have what you're reasonably certain is your fastest lineup for the championship section of the season, which is the Eastern Sprints, then the IRA, which is our national championships, and then for Yale oarsmen, the Yale Harvard race.
Very, very good news. And of course, I was particularly enamored when you said it's not an exact science. I think we've all been there. I'd like to ask you a little bit now about skill drills and exercises. Do you have some favored drills for rhythm and run? Which is a question from Michelle Holland from Commercial Rowing Club in Brisbane, Australia.
I do. One of my favorite drills for exactly that purpose is add a pair. That might seem odd that drill would be used, but describing add a pair is, let's assume you're in an 8 and you start your stern pair rows 10 strokes. Then 6 and 5 comes in, then 4, then so forth up the line. And all during the addition of the pairs, obviously the hull speed is increasing. Therefore, pressure on the face of the blade is going to be accelerated. The need to finish it off and release it and send the boat is there. And going from the heavy load to the light load is very informative and can help promote that surge through the drive that we're all looking for, the building of pressure, the lock, and the send. And I like that drill very much for that purpose.
Fabulous, that's a great tip. Now, I just want to ask the tough one. In your time at Yale, what is the one thing that you've made in terms of a change to the program that you think has made the most difference, has had the biggest impact?
Well, I think this is that I'll reference a talk that I gave when I arrived at Yale, and I did the same thing at Berkeley years before that. Is that as coaches, as people, we're drawn to what is quantifiable. We like hard data. We want splits. We want meters per second. We want, now there's a great drive to, we're looking at power curves. We're looking at max VO2s and utilizations and all this very interesting information. It's all good, but ultimately, no program will work unless the mind and the soul of the athlete is engaged. And very often as coaches, we move away from that. We would say, well, that's too airy-fairy. It's not quantifiable. But unless there's a base of trust that's built between the coaches and the athlete, faith in the practices of the endeavor, the understanding that what we do are small actions, are small behaviors, how we present, are going to influence the outcome. And let me circle back to a component of the talk that I gave when I came to Yale. It was this. This was part of it. I said, look, you know the program that I've coached prior to coming here, and we know that over the past 12 years at Cal, as we call it, those varsity crews medaled 11 of the 12 years at the national championships, and 5 of them were gold medals. And you're probably thinking, well, Steve's going to come here and he's going to put a program forward, and that program is going to do the trick. And I said, that's not the case. I said, that's not true at all. I said, it's not the program. It's what you bring to the structure. The program in itself, without your buy-in, without your complete devotion to it, is worthless. It has, it's not going to do anything. So what you bring to it is what's important, which makes the difference. And I think establishing that fact to begin with is critical. It's not, it's not fairy dust that comes down from an exact science of training. There are a number of ways. The old phrase, my father would use, there are a number of ways of skinning the cat. I'm sure that would not be very politically correct these days. We wouldn't want to think of skinning cats, but it's the faith that the athletes have in the program and they have in each other. And the only way that faith can be built is through proper action that brings a result. You can't develop faith around a round table discussion. It has to be developed on the water and through hard, consistent training. So, yeah.
No crew is the same, and you have kindly given us some guidance in how proper action develops faith, and faith develops a program which develops outcomes. Tell us about your Phoenix class from 2015.
Mm-hmm. Well, let me describe it this way. The first 2 years at Yale, there was progress. There were cultural changes, but not dramatic. And it was this class that I dubbed the Phoenix class, interestingly enough, that came to Yale, and they brought a joy and a vitality to what we were doing. They individually and collectively loved to compete. They weren't heavy in terms of mood and tone. They were going to have a good time, and they were going to have a good time making the boats go fast. And that was the first life sign. And there was material progress. That group went on as their first year at the university, bringing the varsity crew to winning the small finals at the national championship. And at that particular time, that was a significant achievement. And it was all attitude and tone with the group. And interesting enough, they were from all over the place. They were, from the States, they were from New Zealand, they were from Great Britain. It was a full range. But they brought a joy and a vitality to the process. And that was really the beginning of the renaissance of the Yale heavyweight program.
It's certainly true that a substantive cultural change takes 3 years, and you see the effects from the outside 3 years in. When you're on the inside, you can begin to effect changes early and you can see them coming through. But in my experience, and I've been through a few programs, it definitely is that moment where they go, overnight success, and you go, yeah, that was a little bit of groundwork,
Right. And, it is a process. And I must say, from a coaching standpoint, when you're in that process, first of all, it's enormously challenging. But it's very much, and it's very much like being in the wilderness. And all coaches that are listening to this understand that you will doubt your protocol. You'll say,
put your name forward and come join us next month on RowingChat. Till then, bye-bye.